Update on the case involving the arrest of Jeffrey Strasser on April 12th. On April 13th, the Milwaukee Police Department released a statement on the arrest that had occurred the previous evening. In that statement, the department represented its initial understanding of the events that preceded and resulted in the arrest of Jeffrey Strasser. After the arrest, we initiated a comprehensive use of force review. That review has not contradicted the main points in our initial statement. Now, it's important to note that we initiated the review ourselves, and in the 7 days since the arrest, we have conducted numerous interviews, reviewed hours of video sources, reviewed reports, and made referrals to prosecutors. In fact, today, the case against Mr. Strasser was presented to the DA and has been pended over to a later date in May. Police officers have the lawful authority to use force to effectuate an arrest and to secure compliance with lawful commands. Every time an officer uses force, that use of force is subjected to several layers of department review. Now, the outcomes of these reviews can result in a determination that the use of force was appropriate. It can result in a determination that the use of force was within policy or outside policy. It can result in a determination that retraining is necessary or that an internal investigation should be initiated. What we know now is that during the booking process, the only injuries Mr. Strasser reported were scrapes to his knuckles and the tops of his hands. These injuries were consistent with the initial reports that he had kept his hands under his body in an attempt to resist being handcuffed. However, we have also learned that during the booking process, Mr. Strasser appears to have shown a desire to make a complaint against the police officer. That complaint was not documented at the time. Therefore, although we have completed our administrative review of the use of force in this case, and we have determined that additional investigations are required by our Internal Affairs Division. The internal investigation must focus on two specific issues. One is the complaint by the suspect, and secondarily, whether or not administrative procedures were properly followed during this arrest. Our work is not done. We have to follow the facts that we have in our possession and the evidence in our possession. Now, tonight and tomorrow night, we will be recanvassing the Water Street area in an attempt to find any other witnesses to the events of April 12th. But unless there is information in the hands of witnesses who have yet to come forward that contradicts our understanding of these events, unless there is a clearer video that clearly contradicts our reviews of the videos that have been made available to us, then what we currently know must remain unchanged and our initial determination stand. Now, I note that we have received a multitude of Freedom of Information requests. These requests have been for officers' hard cards, for their personnel files, for their discipline histories. Some of them have pertained to the divorce records of some of our officers. Some have been pertaining to the medical histories of our officers. Now, whatever people think they're going to find out from these various records, the point remains they are not directly pertinent to whether or not we have any evidence to contraindicate our review of the specific use of force to overcome the level of resistance to arrest that was encountered that night. I'll say it again. We have to follow the facts and the evidence. Now, there are 1,800 officers in the field in this police department working every day under difficult circumstances, and some of them are going to use force. It's been documented by the Fire and Police Commission that in 1% of the arrests made by this police department in the last year, fully evaluated, force was used by a member of the department. Officers need to believe that when we investigate them, we are following the facts that we can uncover and not simply responding to the glare of publicity. Now, I'm happy to use you, as we have during this last week. If there are people there who have information that has not been made known to us, then it must be made known. But we do not have any information now that indicates that the 1.5 seconds of force employed to get this individual's hands behind him for handcuffing were on their face clearly beyond the policies and training that our officers have been subjected to. Now, we are working hard in this department to be transparent. We have robust internal affairs processes. We have a history of fairly significant discipline being deployed to officers that we find are outside our value set and outside our policies. We're going to continue to do that. When we believe our officers have maintained themselves within policy, we will so report. And if we have evidence that shows that officers have exceeded their authority or their training or their policy, we will continue to take appropriate action. Having said that, I invite your questions now.
During the booking, how did Mr. Strasser indicate he wanted to file a complaint, and how was that responded to?
He made a verbal representation when asked if he had a complaint that he wanted to make a complaint, and our initial understanding is at the time he was told that a complaint could be put in his personal property and that he could fill it out at a later date. That does not entirely comply with what we recommend our supervisors do.
Was a use of force report filed before the YouTube video surfaced?
Use of force reports are almost never filed the night of the incident. Use of force reports are filed by supervisory personnel based on an evaluation of all of the circumstances. This was a late night arrest. It is not at all uncommon for us to only do the main arrest report the night of the arrest. You'll notice one of the issues we've been very attentive to is overtime. We do not wait for every single report to be done that night. And it is a matter of long standing in this department. Since the use of force reports are a supervisory function, they are always filled out at a later date and not usually contemporaneous with the incident.
You said no. Is that a no?
I mean what I just said, okay? We do those reports at a later date. They're not filed contemporaneously. It's not at all routine. So the fact that it was a YouTube video or not a YouTube video is less relevant to the fact that we don't file them that night. They're filed by supervisors at a later date.
Is the officer still out on the street, Chief, because he's working a regular shift?
No, he's not working on the streets right now. I think what's important for us to recognize, all of us, whatever you believe you saw, this officer is not going to be put in a position where he has to use powers of arrest or force. He's under a great deal of scrutiny. He knows that. We know that. I don't think it's necessarily safe for him to be in a position where he's looking over his shoulder, at the same time expected to use law enforcement powers.
You said you're looking for additional video. Did dash cam not capture any of this?
Well, as you know, if you've seen the video, this took place on the ground. That's not where our dash cams are aiming. We checked the area out for whether or not there were any other videos in any of the buildings. There weren't any. We know there were a couple of 3 videos posted on YouTube. We viewed them, but none of them really show a significantly different view than what was contained in the first video. We still have 1.5 seconds of activity, and most of the video was after the initial stop, the initial vehicle pursuit. There were a number of incidents that precipitated the car being pulled over. It was reported to us that it was driving recklessly. It was followed with its lights out. It was chased into a parking lot. The individual did not come out of his car for some 30 seconds after he was stopped. There was a lot of commotion before this individual found himself on the ground. We have not yet found documentation that refutes what has been reported to us, and that's a challenge that unless we can find something different, we're going to have to stand by what we know.
What's the line between acceptable and excessive force?
Well, everything depends on circumstances. There's a reasonable police officer standard here. We expect sufficient force to be used to overcome resistance and to secure compliance. I'm sure many of you have seen other videos of officers who are perceived to have behaved badly. What we have in front of us are 2 strikes. Now, the officer in that context, to secure compliance, theoretically could have used a taser. theoretically could have used OC spray, theoretically could have used the baton. Point is, they used 2 strikes.
So what's
and there's no magic number. It depends on the totality of the circumstances, and the circumstances as we have in front of us now do not clearly show a violation of policy or of training.
But you say force is used only in 1% of arrests. What about this arrest made it so unusual that it would be needed?
I really am having difficulty with your question, okay? The individual was not complying with commands to remove his hands from under his body and be handcuffed.
Witnesses and both the suspect arrested have told a different story, saying that they saw another officer on his back with his hands behind him. Is that not true?
Well, if that person has got evidence that they've given to you, we need to hear it. So we'll be happy to follow up on that at a later date, but that's not a person we've talked to. That's not what we've heard.
Mike, you got a question?
Yeah, Chief, is there anything in the training policy that says no focus strikes to the head when somebody's down on the ground, face down?
Well, the point is that the idea is that we can use sufficient force to overcome resistance, all right? I mean, theoretically, as I say, could someone have used a taser? Yeah, they could have, in order to secure compliance to get the hands behind and be handcuffed. So, once you start to use force, the question is reasonableness, and reasonableness is measured by extension of injuries as well as the amount of force used. We have no reports that serious injuries were sustained. We do know that compliance was secured. And so our challenge remains. If we've got witnesses out there telling you stuff they're not telling us, then we need to talk to them. Because that's not what we have.
State training
And whether he was pulled off.
Not had a chance yet. Keith? Mr. Strasser went to the hospital to get tested out the next night. Were you guys given the medical, the records from that evening, and do they have more injuries than just the hands as part of your investigation?
We know that he's made complaints about injuries to his jaw area. I do not have his medical records available. No.
State training procedures state that use of force should only be used when standing.
The fact of the matter remains that there are times when people are on the ground. You're basically telling me that if we're in a wrestling match, we don't use force. When you're on the ground with somebody trying to get them to comply with appropriate police commands and to be arrested, if you're on the ground, there's a whole class in ground fighting offered. So I'm a little unclear as to what you're confronting me with.
So it's okay for your department to go against what they're trained to do?
You know what? That's not what happened here. We don't have anybody going against what they were trained to do.
Chief, could you tell us about the officer involved and the reports that he had his gun taken from him and put on desk duty due to some mental health issues?
Well, we can spend a lot of time deconstructing our officer, all right? I would like the courtesy of treating my officers like common criminals, which is not expending all of our time trying to find out what's wrong with them and not looking at the case in chief. We are investigating a very specific case, which is a use of force. I am reporting to you that we have not been presented with evidence that contradicts our understanding of the incident. Now, I'm sure if you dig enough into anybody else's life, you're going to find something bad about them. That doesn't necessarily address the facts before us. We have a supine suspect not complying with arrest procedures against whom 2 focus strikes in 1.5 seconds were used, which gained compliance. If we have information that shows that he was in fact complying and was in fact helpless and our version of events is wrong, I urge people to bring that information to us. Until then, I am sharing with you the objective information at our disposal now.
But given the history of
Thank you
this
very
officer,
much.